What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And it's time. It's time. You knew I had to do it. It's time for that Legend of Korra Season 1 overview. And I made a little bit of controversy a couple of months ago when I did my season 1 finale of The Legend of Korra, and I basically said it was trash, which it was. And so a lot of you could probably anticipate what my feelings would be about season 1 overall, which is basically that it's trash. Just off the top of my head, if I had to give it a grade on a scale from A to F, it'd probably be a D. D plus, between a D plus and a D minus. I won't go as low as an F, but definitely in that D range. And as a result, I'm not going to be reviewing season 2, so please don't even ask me. And if I do review season 2 of Legend of Korra, if I decide to do it, you can point at this video, link me to my own video and say, look at you, Uber Hikari, you're a hypocrite. You can do that, but seriously, I'm not reviewing season 2. Season 1 was bad enough, and you can't pull a okie doke on me twice. I'm sorry, I just won't be had twice. So before I get into my overview, and it'll be broken down into, I think, 3 different parts. It'll be the pacing. Have to talk about the pacing of this first season, and a lot of people noticed this while they were reviewing season 1. The pacing was very, very fast. Second, I'm going to talk about the characters and the character development, and talk about my thoughts on basically how they messed up almost all the characters. And last, I want to talk about plot holes and plot inconsistencies and retcons. I have to talk about that. I mean, that was just, that last episode, terrible. That season 1 finale, terrible. The way they retcon their own canon material. But like I said, before I get into those 3 major points, I have to talk about people's opinions. And I noticed this when I was reviewing Legend of Korra. A lot of people would give their opinions, and they say, I have an opinion about this, or your opinion about this is wrong. Honestly, and I don't want to offend anybody when I say this, but I don't give a shit about your opinions. And I don't want to be mean when I say that, but I just have to let you guys know that I don't give a shit about your opinions. And this is what I mean when I say that. As a regular person, I care about your opinions. Like if I'm in a call with you, you know, in the Cloud Village or whatever, you guys want to talk to me, I care about what your opinions are. But when I put on my reviewer's hat and when I'm analyzing something, I don't care about your opinions. I care about your arguments. So if you make a good argument, if you make a persuasive argument, if you make a plausible argument, then I'll listen to you and I'll take that into consideration, and I might be willing to change my position based on what your argument is. But as far as your opinions, I don't give a shit about what your opinions are as a reviewer. I just want to make that separation between when Uber Hikari is just a regular person and when Uber Hikari puts on his reviewer's hat. Because once I put on that reviewer hat, don't care about your opinions. Could give a shit less, really. So first, let's talk about pacing. Basically, the pacing sucked. The pacing sucked. First of all, there are, like almost everybody knows, there are several components of a plot. And there are several components of plot structure. And there's a certain way that you have to pace yourself between one element of the plot structure and another element of the plot structure. So when I say components of plot structure, I mean exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and the denouement or resolution. The Legend of Korra Season 1 had no clear connection between these aspects of plot structure and the overall story development. So there was just a radical inconsistency. So for example, in one week you'd have very, very excellent dramatic tension, and then all of a sudden in the very next week, whatever produced the dramatic tension in the previous week would just be resolved, just like that. And one example I had of this was Tarlok. I think it was in episode 9. There was the big reveal. Oh my gosh, Tarlok's a bloodbender. What does this mean? What are the implications for the story development? What are the implications for this character? Oh my gosh, this is so cool. The very next week, Tarlok was arrested. And you're like, come on. I mean, you went through the trouble of building up all of this dramatic tension, and then in the very next episode, without any explanation or exploration of how this would impact the overall story development, just like that, he gets arrested? Thumbs down. Thumbs down. Second, when it comes to pacing, there was just too many characters. Too many characters, too many plots and subplots. And I don't think a lot of people realized this as they were watching Legend of Korra Season 1, but by my count, there was about 9 central characters. 9. Who do we have? We had Korra, Tenzin, Lin Beifong, Asami, Mako, Bolin, Hiroshi, Tarlok, and Amon. 9 central characters in a 12-episode season. That's kind of pushing it. I mean, it's okay if you have secondary characters, peripheral characters that aren't really going to be an impact or have a major impact on the overarching storyline, but to have 9? That's pushing it in 12 episodes. That's really pushing it. And there were some characters who you thought could have been important, but were just used as plot devices. And Larry from Otaku Assemble touched on this in one episode review where he talked about the Republic City Council. The only people who we know from the Republic City Council, Tarlok and Tenzin. That's it. And the other 3, they were just used as silly plot devices, like when Amon was trying to take over Republic City when he had invaded in, I think it was episode 11, and then we see maybe 3 or 4 minute scene where one of the representatives from the Republic Council was being kidnapped and taken hostage. And you're just like, really? These characters who were on the Republic City Council who could have at some point had a major impact on the storyline, or seems like they should have because they were on a very important political body within the Avatar world. The only thing they did was nod, shake their heads, yes or no, or raise their hands when it was time to take a vote. That's all we got from the Republic City Council. And the 4 plot lines that we had in one season, and again, this is all pushing it. 4 plot lines. So the first 1 to 3 episodes was the intro. We get Tenzin, Korra, Lin, Mako, Bolin, and Amon, and the creation of the team. That was episodes 1 through 3. Episode 4 was the creation of the task force, and yeah, was the creation of the task force. And I think Asami and Hiroshi were introduced at that point as well. Episodes 5 and 6 was the pro-bending stuff, which really didn't go anywhere. The only thing that was just a setup for Amon blowing up the stadium. That was pretty much it. And so yeah, that was basically the first 6 episodes. And this is somewhat problematic because by the halfway point of a 12-episode season, you should be developing your characters and developing your main plot line, not introducing new subplots. But what do we get in episode 7? We get Asami versus Hiroshi subplot that really went nowhere at all. Then in episodes 8 and 9, which I already sort of touched on, was the whole Tarlok fiasco, and that had to be resolved. And then in episodes 10 through 12, we get the Amon resolution. So too many, I mean, the writers were just trying to juggle too many plots and subplots, and it really wreaked havoc on the pacing of this series. And one way that you can really tell that the pacing was really screwed up for the first season, whatever happened to Korra's airbending training? And I remember this week after week, people were doing their reviews and they were saying, wow, I really wonder what's happening with Korra's airbending training. I mean, because after all, the season 1 was book air. And I think we only had maybe 2 scenes out of 12 episodes of Korra airbending. That's why at the end of the season, when Korra all of a sudden she can airbend, she's just like, I can airbend? We're like, yeah, you can airbend. I mean, that's why it seemed like such a contrived plot device, because we saw none of the development that would lead up to this being a plausible scenario, given the development of the story up to this point. It just made no sense, and it made it seem like a silly contrived plot device. So basically, there was too many characters, too many plots, too many subplots, too much stuff happening. As a result, the story was too fragmentary, and the story and the 12 episodes really felt squished together. They felt really, really compressed, and the pacing felt like it was just way, way, way too fast, and not enough development, not enough exploration or explanation between the various elements of plot structure. And I think that really hurt the potential dynamism of the story, even though I will admit that the first season was very entertaining. But like I always say, there's a difference between what you enjoy and what you should consider to be quality. And a lot of people bring up this point whenever I talk about how the pacing of the season wasn't all that good and the story was too compressed and too smushed together. A lot of people try to make the excuse, well, the writers only had 12 episodes. It was only so much that they can do. But my response, who cares? Who cares if the writers only have 12 episodes? I mean, whose fault is it that they tried to pack 16 to 17 episodes worth of a story into only 12 episodes? Whose fault is that besides the writers? They knew what they had going in. They knew what their constraints were going in. It would be like if I tried to write if a professor tells me, okay, write a 5-page paper. That's what your assignment is. You have to write a 5-page paper. And I try to write about the origin of the universe. And then I write, what I think is just an excellent paper. Try to pack in all of this stuff into 5 pages. I hand it in and I get my grade back and I get an F. And I say to the professor, well, I mean, it's not my fault. You only gave me 5 pages. If I had more to work with, I could have wrote a spectacular paper, even better than the one I think I wrote. You know what the professor will say to me? Well, whose fault is it that you tried to pack a book into a 5-page paper? It's not my fault. You knew what the page limitations were going in. And in the same vein, the writers who tried to pack this much story into 12 episodes, they knew what they were getting into once they signed the contract on the dotted line, and once they knew that Nickelodeon was only going to give them 12 episodes for this first season. It's their fault. And one thing that Melina Pendulum pointed out was that some animes are only 12 or 13 episodes long. And the pacing is fine in those series. Like, for example, Hibane Renmei. Hibane Renmei was only like 12 episodes long. Still a pretty good series. The pacing was still spot on. And even Afro Samurai, which was only like 5 episodes, still had pretty good pacing in it. So again, that's no excuse for the writers. Now let's talk about character development. And I'm really going to have to dig into this one and basically break down my thoughts on all 9 of the central characters, because I really have to get this out. First, let's start with the protagonist, Korra. The major problem with Korra, and I said this multiple times when I was reviewing the series, is that she never addressed the central conflict of the story. and remarkably, that remained true even up until the season finale. Korra never addressed the central conflict of the story. And like I said, when I was reviewing this, Amon is the central antagonist of the story. But Amon is not the central conflict of the story. The central conflict of the story is the conflict, or the sort of war between benders and non-benders. By the end of the season, Korra managed to defeat the main antagonist, Amon, although she didn't really defeat him. She kind of defeated him. I mean, Amon died in a murder-suicide, but still, even after that, we got no resolution of the bender versus non-bender conflict. No resolution whatsoever. It was like, okay, I've beat Amon, that's it. Let's all go home and sing Kumbaya. That was pretty much the feeling you got at the end of the season finale. So again, the writers just dropped the ball. And this was the impetus for Korra's character development. So if you have a protagonist, i.e. Korra, and make no mistake about it, Korra is supposed to be the hero protagonist. She's not just the protagonist. She's also supposed to be the hero. And as the Avatar, she's supposed to be the sort of spiritual and political guiding force or leader of the Avatar world, if you will. So if the central conflict of the story is a political conflict and the Avatar has the task of resolving political conflicts in the Avatar world, and the Avatar doesn't do that, not only does it make the story seem silly because the Avatar doesn't even fulfill their role, but it makes the protagonist Korra seem silly because the impetus for her story development was never resolved by her. Makes no sense. Now let's talk about Tenzin. Tenzin, the impetus for Tenzin's character development was that he was supposed to become a well-developed character by becoming a better mentor. And he pretty much failed at this. And he failed, why? Because Korra never addressed the central conflict of the freaking story. She never became a fully realized Avatar. Being an Avatar just doesn't mean you can bend all four elements and energy bend and go into the Avatar state. Being an Avatar also means that you deal with and address the political conflicts of the Avatar world. And she never did that. So in that sense, Tenzin as a mentor failed. Another problem that I had with Tenzin, and I mentioned this as well throughout my reviews of season 1, was that he constantly engaged in this black and white thinking. He constantly reinforced this false notion that the only thing Korra had to deal with was Amon. All of the impetus and all of the focus was on defeating Amon. You have to defeat Amon. It was never, you have to defeat Amon and then you have to address the Bender versus non-Bender conflict. It was just, we have to defeat Amon. Amon's evil. Amon's bad. You must defeat Amon. That was it. So, as a mentor, he absolutely failed because he never forced Korra to confront the Bender versus non-Bender conflict. Now let's talk about Lin. Lin is actually, yeah, I go so far as to say she's my favorite character from Legend of Korra Season 1. And I thought she had some very good character development. She went from really not liking Korra or Tenzin to becoming a very, very important part of the team. And one of the things that I pointed out, I can't remember which episode this was in, but one thing I really liked about Lin Beifong is that her character position, her character role with respect to the overarching story really changed, and it really produced some very good character development. And what I mean by that specifically is when she resigned her commission as police chief and she became more of a sort of extra-legal vigilante figure. And I really, really like that character development for Lin Beifong. And one of the things I liked about it was that it produced a sort of trio of very, very strong female characters in Legend of Korra, which you really don't see that often. So you had Korra, who was the high-strung Avatar. You had Asami, who was strong, and I'll get to her in a minute. And then you had the former chief of police, Lin Beifong, going off on this vigilante mission to sort of atone for having her men be captured under her command. And I really sort of like that personal struggle that Lin Beifong went through and the sort of transformation that came as a result of that. And of course, who can remember that iconic scene of Lin Beifong staying behind and losing her bending so that Korra and Tenzin could get away? Awesome, awesome, iconic scene. Love Lin Beifong. And who could forget her ripping up those airships with her metal bending? Absolutely epic. Love Lin Beifong. Now let's talk about Bolin. Bolin, pretty much a lame character. Well, I mean, what more can you say about Bolin? He had a little bit of character development, which came as a result of him finding out that his brother was going after the girl that he made very, very clear to his brother that he liked. So he got some character development. But that was pretty, besides that, that was pretty much it. He hardly got any character development. His importance consisted in being part of a love square. That's pretty much what Bolin was. A very, very awkward love square that involved Asami, Korra, Bolin, and Mako. That's as important as Bolin got, because by the end of the series, he really wasn't doing much. I mean, he was kind of fighting in the war, but from a character standpoint, he wasn't that important. He was just fluff, filler. Now let's talk about Mako. Mako absolutely devolved as a character. And I suppose, in a sense, that's some kind of character development. But he was just a horrible character. Absolutely terrible character. I mean, he kissed the girl that he knew his brother was trying to date, cheated on his girlfriend with Korra, never really took responsibility for his actions, just an all-around dirtbag. And by the end of this series, his importance was basically in being the love interest of the protagonist hero. That's pretty much what he was about. Now let's talk about Asami. Actually, I liked Asami. She didn't get that much character development. I felt like she basically got shafted by the writers. I mean, there was really no character development for her, but from her character sort of archetyped, I liked the kind of character that she was. And despite the fact that she didn't get hardly any development. She was a very powerful female figure. Like I said, she was a part of that trio of Lin Beifong, Korra, and herself. But she never got any psychological development. None. None whatsoever. She never got any psychological character development. And so the fact that she chose her friends over her father never went anywhere as a plot point or as a point of character development. There was no exploration of her psychology with respect to her relationship with her father. And one of the things that Melina Pendulum pointed out, and which I absolutely agree with, was that in stories, it's a good thing to have strong female protagonists and strong female characters. That's a great thing. We all want to see diversity when it comes to strong female characters. But it's not enough to have strong female characters. There needs to be relationships, certain female or feminine relationships established between those strong female characters as well. And I think the fact that Asami and Korra were both sort of strong female characters could have been the nexus for some deeper character development. But instead, what did we get? We get left with them fighting over a dirtbag like Mako. I mean, that was the nexus. That was the intersection of the relationship between Korra and Asami. So rather than Korra going to Asami and talking with her about how she feels about her father, or allowing that to be some jumping off point for a deeper relationship between Korra and Asami, they got left with a relationship centered around a dirtbag like Mako. I mean, pretty much a terrible situation. That's just terrible writing by Brian and Mike, basically. I mean, so in episode 7, we get Asami, who stands up for herself, who tells her father that he's wrong, that he's crazy, that Amon is a bad guy, that Amon was wrong. So we get her standing up, siding with her friends as against her father. And yet, between episode 7 and the final resolution of the Hiroshi Sato versus Asami subplot, we get no explanation or exploration of that relationship in any significant or meaningful way. So for basically 4.5 episodes, that subplot basically got dropped, with no deeper exploration of it and no exploration of how that affected Asami, and no explanation or exploration of how that could have been used to produce character development for Asami. And in the end, what was Asami left with? A boyfriend who cheated on her, a father who tried to kill her, and now she has to be friends with the girl who her ex-boyfriend cheated on her with and is currently with. all around terrible situation for Asami. The writers did her dirty. They did the homegirl pretty grimy. They did it pretty grimy. Now let's talk about Hiroshi Sato. Complete. I think he probably had the most, besides Amon, the main antagonist, he probably had the worst character inconsistency. You could say that Mako was a dirtbag, but at least he was consistently a dirtbag. Like, you could count on him consistently to be a dirtbag. Hiroshi did a complete 180. It didn't even make sense by the end of the series. Why did he try to kill his daughter? His reasoning for joining Amon was to make a more just world for his daughter, a better world for his daughter, and yet, in episode 7, he was never shown to be insane or crazy. He never showed any propensity to want to hurt his daughter. By all accounts, everything that he was doing, he thought he was doing for the good of his daughter. And yet, by the end of the series, he goes crazy and tries to kill her. What? I don't understand where that came from. What was the foundation of that transformation of his character? Completely inconsistent, and it didn't make any sense. It's just a complete plot hole. No explanation for why he changed from wanting to create a world for his daughter, a more just world for his daughter, to wanting to kill his daughter. Just made no sense whatsoever. Now let's talk about Tarlok. Tarlok, I think, actually had probably the best character development out of the 9 central characters. He was certainly the most dynamic character. He started off as someone who looked like he would be somewhat of a problem, but by the end, he turned into just a force to be reckoned with. Up until the point of being able to take out the freaking Avatar with his blood bending. He had the most dynamic character development of any character in Legend of Korra. I love the way he built himself up. First, he was just someone who was opposed to Tenzin. Then he created this task force. Then he tried to extend the scope and power of the task force. Then he sort of escalated the Bender versus non-Bender conflict. Then he turned into a complete villain. I just love the build-up and the sort of consistency and fluidity of his character development throughout the first 9 or 10 episodes. Just very, very dynamic characterization. And if any of you remember my discussion video about Korra, Amon, and Tarlok, you know how much I just love that idea of Korra, Tarlok, and Amon having, I really didn't want there to be any connection between Amon and Tarlok, and to see what would happen with those 3 characters, what would happen once they had a certain ideological clash, because I thought that would have produced a very, very interesting story element and plot point. So yeah, he became a very, very interesting source of villainy. And what happens to Tarlok? Again, some of these characters start off well, but by the end of the series, you look at them and you try to look at the arc of their character development, and you say to yourself, it just really sucked. What happened to Tarlok by the end? He was in prison, and then when he got out of prison, he went to get his brother. He goes out in a murder-suicide? Seriously? A murder-suicide? That's how Tarlok goes out? Really? And absolutely inexplicable. Where did that come from? Did the writer say to themselves, well, we don't really know what to do with these characters, and we don't think we want them back for season 2. So how do we resolve this? And they were all sitting around in the table, and someone said, I got it, murder-suicide. And then someone said, God damn it, that's genius. Exactly how did that conversation go? A murder-suicide? Again, seriously? So you had someone who was a major part of the central conflict, pretty much the only character besides Amon who really was interested in developing an ideology to address the central conflict of the narrative, which was the Bender versus non-Bender conflict. And then he just gets unceremoniously dropped at the end in a very ridiculous and implausible fashion. It's very silly. And so Tarlok was in a position where there could have been very interesting explorations of his characterization with respect to the central conflict, and by the end he just gets dropped in this murder-suicide. Ridiculous. Now let's talk about the final central character, Amon, aka Noatak. Again, these characters start off very well and you think, wow, the writers have really got something ingenious here. And then in retrospect, again, you look at the arc of their character development and you say, what the hell happened? I think aside from Tarlok, he also had, I think Tarlok and Amon are probably tied for the best characterization in this series. I'll just say it that way. And one of the reasons why I liked him is because he wasn't the typical villain. He wasn't the typical evil villain. He actually had very noble aspirations, very well-intentioned, although he was an extremist. And he wasn't, again, the typical villain. And he reminded me of Char Aznavour from Gundam. And if any of you have watched my videos, you know how highly I rate Char Aznavour. I mean, to me, that's like the pinnacle of characterization in anime and manga. But someone who was the primary antagonist of a series, but not the villain. Someone who I thought was either an anti-villain at the very least, but had the potential to be a Byronic hero. Someone who was about justice and equality, but just went about it in a very extremist fashion. And how was Amon defeated? He was unmasked as a hypocrite. I mean, just I'm utterly speechless when I was watching this. Just absolutely terrible. And I mean, and literally that's what Korra's plan was. We'll go to the Equalist rally and we'll unmask Amon as a hypocrite, and then no one will follow him anymore. And I'm thinking, that makes absolutely no sense. Why? Because hypocrisy has no bearing on the legitimacy of your beliefs. You can be a hypocrite and yet your beliefs can be completely legitimate. Imagine someone who we think is a humanitarian, a global humanitarian. His aim in life is to go around the globe preaching peace, trying to get people to stop warfare. And he receives the Nobel Peace Prize for all of his humanitarianism. And later on, we find out that this guy is a secret arms dealer, that he was actually funding multiple terrorist cells throughout the world. Does that somehow invalidate his beliefs of peace? No, of course it doesn't. We can say it's perfectly legitimate to say this guy was a hypocrite, but what he preached publicly was still a very good idea. Everybody should try to strive for peace. Everybody should be a humanitarian. So it made no sense to try and delegitimize Amon simply because he turned out to be a bender. It made absolutely no sense whatsoever. So rather than have Amon, or rather the protagonist, grapple with Amon about the central conflict of the narrative, which again, for the umpteenth time, was the conflict between benders and non-benders, well, we'll just unmask him as a hypocrite, and then he'll be invalidated, and then he'll be defeated. I mean, that was just, very sloppy writing, again, from Brian and Mike. And by the end of the series, Amon just became a ridiculous parody of himself. After he was unmasked, he ran away from Korra and Mako, basically like a coward, even though he had bested Korra in combat several times, and the only thing she could do at this point was airbend. He just ran away from her, inexplicably. Just ran away from her. And of course, after this, he just seemed to abandon all his ideals and beliefs and just dies in a murder-suicide. Very, very silly. And another thing that was very, very cliche about Amon and his whole backstory, which just seems so cheesy and contrived, is that he had daddy issues. Ugh. How many times are we going to see this with antagonists and their freaking daddy issues? I mean, could you come up with something a little bit more original for a character's backstory besides their freaking daddy issues? Just really trite and worn out motif. So finally, let's talk about the plot holes and the inconsistencies. First plot hole that has to do with Korra. Whatever happened to the Avatar state? And this was something that Melina Pendulum pointed out again. Really like Melina Pendulum. If you haven't checked out her channel, you should definitely check her channel out. But whatever happened to Korra in the Avatar state? Originally, in the original series, the Avatar state was explained as a defense mechanism to protect the Avatar when they were in imminent danger of losing their life. There were multiple times throughout the series where Korra, like the time when she was captured by Amon, for example, multiple times throughout the series when Korra was in serious danger, and yet she never went into the Avatar state. The Avatar state is not something you could control initially as the Avatar. Like I said, in the original series, it was explained that the Avatar state was a defense mechanism that you involuntarily went into as the Avatar whenever you were in imminent danger. And here we have Korra. Multiple times she was in imminent danger, and yet she never went into the Avatar state. Why is that? Just really, really weird and really awkward plot hole from the writers. I mean, they didn't even take the time out to stick with the canon that they had established in the first series. Really awkward. Second plot hole that deals with Korra. How can Korra now go into the Avatar state at will? She shouldn't be able to. Remember Guru Pathik? Who remembers Guru Pathik and his explanation of the Avatar state and the chakras when he was trying to teach Aang to go into the Avatar state? What happened to the chakras? That's a complete retcon of their own canon material. Things that had been established in the first series just went straight out the window. In this series, at the end of the first season, there was no talk about chakras, nothing about the light chakra or any other chakras. The heart chakra, no explanation of that. And now Korra can just willingly go into the Avatar state without having no understanding of the spiritual components of the Avatar state? How could that be? A complete and total retcon. Third plot hole in the series. Aang at the end of the season finale, Aang comes to Korra when she's standing like on the edge of that cliff, and he comes and says, the reason why you can now contact me, Aang is talking to Korra, and he tells her the reason why you can now contact me is because you're at your most spiritual when you're at your lowest point. What? Again, where was this in the first series? Guru Pathik never told Aang that. He never told Aang that you're at your most spiritual when you're at your lowest point. Again, a complete and utter retcon so that they can have this Deus Ex Machina, this silly contrived plot device whereby they can have Aang energy bend on Korra and give her the ability to go into the Avatar state. A complete and total retcon, a complete plot hole, a complete Deus Ex Machina. First of all, it was established already in the first series that spirits can't bend. The only time you could say that a spirit bended was when Avatar Roku took over Aang's body and fire bended. But spirits by themselves can't bend without using a physical body as a conduit for this spiritual energy. So how can Aang energy bend? A spirit, a dead person, how can they bend? That's number one. Number two, when was it ever established that Aang's energy bending could allow him to give other avatars the ability to go into the avatar state at will? When was this established? Again, a complete and total retcon, a complete plot hole, a complete Deus Ex Machina. A complete retcon. It made absolutely no sense. Fourth plot hole of the series. How was Korra able to airbend at the end in the season finale against Amon? Seriously, how was she able to do this? We never saw her have the ability to airbend. The only thing we saw about Korra was in the pro bending, where she was finally able to implement her maneuvers from her airbending training. But we never saw her airbend a puff of air. Nothing. And not only did she never airbend, so it's completely inexplicable how she can all of a sudden airbend when she's in the middle of a fight with Amon. With that whole, oh, I learned to airbend because I love Mako and I have to protect and save Mako, so I can airbend now. Okay? Not only was that silly and ridiculous, but Amon took away her ability to bend. Again, these are just ridiculous plot holes. Presumably, if someone can take away your ability to bend, they should be able to take away all of your ability to bend. Not just for elements that you had previously bended, but for all elements that you have the potential to bend. How precisely does Amon's ability to take away somebody's bending work? How could he take away somebody's bending, but only for elements that they previously bended? That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Again, ridiculous. Ridiculous, trite, worn out plot device, plot hole, Deus Ex Machina. Ridiculous. So, yeah, that's pretty much it for the plot holes. And they're going to have to live with this now, with this ridiculous ending to season 1, where Aang can come in, give Korra the ability, give Korra not just her bending back, but give her the ability to energy bend. And that's another thing I didn't mention. Not only does Aang give her her bending back, not only does Aang give her the ability to go into the avatar state at will, but he also gives her the ability to energy bend. I mean, when was this established? Absolutely ridiculous that the writers could come in and completely take rules that they established in their own first series and retcon it so that they could have a way to finish the season finale of Legend of Korra. At this point, they just made up stuff. They just made it up because it was easy and convenient for them to resolve their plot this way, for them to resolve their story this way, which was just unacceptable to me. So my assessment of Legend of Korra: the writers never resolved the central conflict of the narrative. At the end of the season, there's still a bender versus non-bender conflict. The ideals of the Equalists are still valid. Korra never deals with that. So they never even resolve the central conflict of the narrative, which they themselves wrote. And I guess the question is, will the Equalists just forget about this? They'll say to themselves, yeah, we still think the benders are oppressive, but oh hell, the season is over, so we'll just forget about that and everybody will sing Kumbaya now. Really? Are we supposed to believe that? And like I said before, Korra may have developed her abilities as an avatar, but she's basically a failure. Because like I said before, the avatar is the political and spiritual leader of the avatar world. And she never led anybody. She wasn't really a leader of anything, and she never really resolved the central conflict of the story. And as for season 2, I predict that there will be some major problems for season 2. Because the question now is, how could they possibly make Legend of Korra interesting? I mean, you have Korra, who can bend all 4 elements, who can go into the Avatar state at will, and who can energy bend. So the obvious question is, who could oppose her in the Avatar world? Fully realized Avatar. This is the reason why Aang never developed the Avatar state during the first series, because he would be freaking OP. Who could beat him? If Aang had developed the Avatar state in season 2, he could have just gone to Ozai and beaten the guy up and ended the conflict. That's why we had to wait until the end of season 3. And even then, if you remember correctly, Aang never had the ability to go into the Avatar state at will. And a lot of you might not remember this, but in the final fight between Aang and Fire Lord Ozai, Aang went into the Avatar state accidentally. Because remember, Ozai was firebending and he was pushing Aang back, and there was the scar on his back, and Aang hit a sharp rock, and it touched, he hit it with his scar, and that's when he went into the Avatar state. So Aang never had the ability in the first series to go into the Avatar state at will. And yet Korra can do it now, and she can energy bend? Really? Again, who can oppose her now? She's absolutely OP. So I can't see how they can make season 2 interesting at all. So, yeah, that's pretty much my assessment. And D+, D minus is basically my assessment of Legend of Korra Season 1. So, and again, I'm not reviewing Season 2 at all because Season 1 was just absolute trash. And again, you can't pull the okie doke on me twice. Maybe once, but you can't do it twice. So, this was your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.